These are the original words to the Pledge of Allegiance written by Francis Bellamy in 1892. And these are the major changes that took place throughout the years. Don't worry, I'll talk about the changes later. The original pledge was part of a marketing campaign by the popular Youth's Companion magazine. They did things like give out free American flags to people who would help them sell subscriptions. And the magazine hoped to capitalize on the patriotic fervor surrounding the 400th anniversary of Columbus's voyage to the Americas. Bellamy's pledge was not the only pledge used around the turn of the 20th century. Here's another version made a few years earlier. You can see the sentiments pretty much the same, but in the 1920s the country decided to go with Bellamy's instead. Both pledges illustrate the country's response to the new wave of immigrants and the fear that America was shifting away from its, quote, traditional values. Bellamy saw the schools as the vehicle to correct this when he said, "The distinctive principles of true Americanism will not perish as long as free and public education endures." Bellamy's pledge gives us a perfect window into the time period. On one hand, you can see the unifying nature of his Christian socialist views that push for a large government to ensure that workers and owners work together for the common good. On the other hand, you can see hints of nativism, the influence of imperialism, and stirrings of what would eventually be called the eugenics movement. If you don't know what I mean by eugenics, here's a quote from Bellamy. "Where all classes of society merge insensibly into one another, every alien immigrant of inferior race may bring corruption to the stock. There are races more or less akin to our own who we may admit freely and get nothing but advantage by the infusion of their wholesome blood. But there are other races which we cannot assimilate without lowering our racial standard, which should be as sacred to us as the sanctity of our homes." Speaking of eugenics, people do not always put their hand over their hearts when they said the pledge. They actually did something called the Bellamy Salute. Many fascist leaders adopted this in the build-up to World War II, and you can obviously see why the US moved to the whole hand over the heart situation. In 1954, Congress decided to add the words "under God" to show the world that the United States was better than the godless communists as the Cold War raged on across the world. In 1943, the court case West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett stated that schools cannot force students to salute and say the pledge in public schools. What do you think? Should students have to stand up and recite the pledge?